He also represents a district in Illinois that is right near the town of Manteno, which is where Gotion is trying to build another battery facility. And together we've introduced the No Gotion Act, legislation that would make this legislation would make CCP affiliated companies ineligible from receiving federal tax credits. I have some opening remarks, and then I'll ask Darren to say a few words, and then we have an excellent panel of witnesses today who will give comments, and then we'll probably have a discussion with them. I also want to just mention State Rep Tom Coons. Where's Representative Tom's here? Thank you for coming today. I should also mention that we invited Chuck Phelan from Gotion. We offered Gotion a seat at the table right here at the end of June. And at 3 weeks, and they sent us a reply, and he let us previously scheduled family vacation. When he told us that, we offered to let any Gotion employee come and speak today, and he refused to allow anyone else at his company to come and speak. Now, I just want to, again, make that offer. If there's anyone who's a consultant in public relations or a lobbyist representing Gotion, I want to give them the opportunity to be here as well.
I'd be willing to fill the seat.
And at this time, I would like to just mention that we have the township supervisor here of Green Charter Township, Jason Cruz, if you would say a few words.
I'd like to do a prayer if we could, and do a pledge of allegiance before we start the meeting. Okay, if everybody would stand, please. Remove your hats, bow your heads. Okay, Heavenly Father. Oh boy, hold on a second here. Pause. He's calling. Okay. There we go. Heavenly Father, place our work and ourselves into your hands. God, when we are challenged, please guide us. When we are weary, energize us. Bless this country, this meeting, and all who attend. Amen.
Amen.
Now, can we say the Pledge of Allegiance? Right. There we go. Okay. I pledge allegiance to the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Two. Okay. So as acting supervisor of Green Charter Township, I would like to welcome Congressman John Molinar. Thank you for putting this on and willing to participate. Ambassador Joseph Sella, Amanda Piker, Mr. Brian Kavanaugh, Emily Dilla. Okay, I'm sorry about that. And everybody who is in attendance, along with press corps, that's in attendance. So thank you. Appreciate everybody coming to join us today in this discussion.
Mr. Supervisor, the issues in this community today are a fight between David and Goliath. The small town of 3,200 people versus the giant multinational company that's receiving hundreds of millions of dollars in subsidies and bullying its way into town. In November, David struck a blow against Goliath as the voters of Green Charter Township voted out the board that approved the Gotion deal the people did not want. However, it was not a knockout, and Goliath continues to fight, suing the small town and threatening to bury it under legal action. Let there be no doubt, The divide is caused by Gotion, which refuses to accept that the majority of the people in this community do not want it here. I've said from the beginning that I want to see this area have more jobs and investment, but we must not welcome companies that are controlled by people who see us as the enemy, and we should not allow them to build here. Before I talk more about Gotion, though, I think it's useful to take a step back and look at the whole relationship between China and the United States and how recent history has led us to where we are today. For the past few decades, Republican independents all hoped that engaging with the Chinese Communist Party would create new markets for American goods and services, and the Chinese people would eventually enjoy many of the same rights and liberties that we have in this country. This idea even took hold here in Michigan, where the governor and her predecessor sought to attract Chinese businesses to Michigan, offering taxpayer incentives to bring those companies to our state. In the previous decade, I met with leaders of some of these companies. I saw their facilities and learned more about their operations. However, it has become increasingly clear that times have changed. The CCP has become incredibly hostile towards America. It flies spy balloons over our country, steals the inventions of the American people, buys our farmland, and tries to purchase land near our military bases. Past few years, director of the FBI, have been hundreds of reported incidents where Chinese nationals were caught attempting to access U.S. military bases and other sensitive sites. These incidents typically occur in rural areas and often involved a Chinese national in America who was forced to commit espionage and report back to the Chinese government. In April, the House Select Committee on the Chinese Communist Party, which I'm honored to chair, released a bipartisan report documenting how the CCP has deliberately fueled the fentanyl crisis in America by selling the chemical to make fentanyl to the drug cartels in Mexico. We must reset the economic relationship between China and the U.S. And we must be vigilant against welcoming companies like Gotion to our communities. Gotion, Inc. is a wholly owned subsidiary of Gotion High Tech, which is located in China. Many members of the company's leadership are also members of the CCP. Through a civil-military fusion, all Chinese companies are beholden to the CCP and the Chinese military. Xi Jinping, the leader of China, has explicitly said the CCP wants to, quote, tighten international production chains dependence on China, end quote. Bringing Gotion to Mecosta County would help him do that. Right now, China is massively subsidizing its auto industry and battery development. In America, we need more time to develop our own battery technology to catch up. Can you imagine working for an American company, working tirelessly to develop battery technology, and then you find out that your tax dollars are being used to subsidize a competitor from China? I think we all know that's wrong, and we would never want that to happen to us. Then there's Gotion's record. You should know that Gotion's supply chains are linked to human rights abuses and the CCP's genocide of Uyghurs, a religious minority in China. The CCP has forced this group into internment camps and subjected them to murder, torture, gang rape, forced sterilizations, and slave labor. In June, my team and I on the Select Committee identified multiple links between Gotion's supply chain and this genocide. In one example, Gotion sources aluminum foil from a subsidiary of Xinjiang Non-Ferrous, which is a CCP-owned enterprise known for its prolific use of forced labor. We have asked the Forced Labor Enforcement Task Force to investigate these violations and enforce the law, which would ban Gotion's shipments from entering the country. Finally, you should know that the brave men and women of our military want nothing to do with Gotion, as the Department of Defense is prohibited from buying the company's batteries. So why would we allow this company to receive tax dollars, buy our land, and build a factory here? Why would we allow its batteries into our homes and cars? Our own military is telling us Gotion is a bad business partner, and yet state and some local officials refuse to listen. I'll continue to speak out against this project and fight for my constituents who have voiced time and time again that they do not want the Goliath of the CCP in their backyard. And I'll now turn it over to Congressman LaHood for his remarks. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Chairman Mullenhour, and I appreciate the invitation to be here in Green Township. I represent the 16th Congressional District of Illinois, which is central Illinois and the northern part of the state. I appreciate John gave me a visa to come here today to Michigan. Most of you are not my constituents, but but this is obviously a very important topic, and that's the reason why I'm here. And I thoroughly enjoy serving with Chairman Mullenhour on the Select Committee on China. And I just want to take a step back and just remind people why this was created, the Select Committee on China. So earlier in this Congress, under the leadership of Speaker McCarthy, he decided to create a Select Committee on China and put that together, bipartisan. We had 100 Democrats supported the creation of the Select Committee on China. And we've populated it with members of Congress that care deeply about this issue, Republicans and Democrats. And over the course of the last year and a half, we've been focused on a couple things: exposing the malign activities of the CCP, the Communist Chinese Party, all around the globe and here in the United States. Secondarily, how do we win the strategic competition against China, right? How do we look out 10, 20, 30 years as a country and figure out how we win that strategic competition? And I think you do that on the economic front. And so it becomes more apparent to me that we have to be dubious and skeptical of Chinese-related companies, particularly that are tied to the Communist Chinese Party and state-owned enterprises, which is part of the reason why we're here today. I would also say this, I don't say this to scare people, but we have to wake up to the fact, and we've done this on the committee, China has a plan to replace the United States, and they're working at it every single day. They want to replace us technologically, militarily, from a national security standpoint, and diplomatically. And it's not like a 1 or 2 year plan. This is like a 100-year plan. And they don't, the thing about a communist country, elections don't get in the way, right? Democracy doesn't get in the way. Human rights don't get in the way. It's full speed ahead. And we've seen that on our Select Committee on China, and in a bipartisan way. And I'll give some of my colleagues credit in a bipartisan way. Sometimes when you watch our committee, you don't know who's a Republican or a Democrat because we care about it. It should be an American issue and not a partisan issue. And I would just say China plays by a different set of rules and standards than every other industrialized country in the world does. We've seen that over the last 20 plus years since we've allowed them into the World Trade Organization. We did that roughly 22 years ago. And the premise at the time was allow them into the World Trade Organization and they'll modernize their economy, they'll liberalize, they'll become more democratic. None of that has happened. And so we should be skeptical and dubious. We have an obligation and responsibility to our constituents and this country to make sure that we scrutinize everything. And that's why we're here today. I would just mention, people talk about an economic relationship with China, and we clearly have one. But when you look at the relationship with China over the last 20 years, it's really been a roller coaster. It's been up and it's been down. It is down now. And I think it's down because of the Xi Jinping has doubled down on authoritarianism in his country. John mentioned a number of these things that have gone on. You look at the provocation in the South China Sea, the building of islands there, the threats to Taiwan, the takeover of Hong Kong. It's really interesting if you look. No one talks about Tibet anymore. You know why? Chinese have won, right? They suppressed all the human rights there. No one ever mentions Tibet anymore. You look at Hong Kong. They've taken over Hong Kong. They control it. It's a surveillance state now in Hong Kong. Taiwan is next. You look at their support for Putin in Ukraine. Regardless of how you feel about Ukraine, nobody wants to see Ukraine lose more than the Chinese and Xi Jinping. That's why they're arm in arm with Putin against us in Ukraine. They blame COVID on the U.S., right? When COVID broke out, people forget they blamed it on the U.S. Army. You look at the balloon that flew over the U.S. And just the blatant work that the CCP did to do that, the theft of our intellectual property, they continue to steal our intellectual property, and of course the fentanyl crisis. These are just a few things that we need to be aware of and how this relationship has changed. So I wanted to make those opening remarks here. John mentioned a letter that we sent. I ask everybody to read this detailed letter that we put together, dated June 5th, 2024, that went to the Undersecretary of the Department of Homeland Security, a detailed letter signed by Chairman Mollenauer, the chairman of the Homeland Security Committee, Mark Green, Marco Rubio, the leading Republican on the Intelligence Committee, myself, and Carlos Jimenez, that goes detail by detail on why the Forced Labor Enforcement Task Force should immediately place Gotion on the entity list. And this gets into the facts and figures of exactly why that should be done. The No Gotion Act that John mentioned, we have over 50 co-sponsors on that, and it's bipartisan, which I think people will be surprised to learn. I just want to thank our witnesses here today for being here, and I'm going to talk about them in a second here. I particularly want to thank Amanda Piker of Concerned Citizens of Montino, Illinois, for participating in today's roundtable discussion. Her advocacy has helped to shed light on Gotion and the local concerns of their announced expansion facility in Illinois. We are grateful for your perspective, Amanda, and glad you're here with us today. I would also mention, as a member of the House Intelligence Committee and obviously a concerned American, it's become clear that the CCP is attempting to infiltrate and dominate American supply chains in critical sectors. In September 2023, Illinois Governor J.B. Pritzker announced that the Chinese-based battery manufacturer decided to move forward with a new operation facility in Manteno, Illinois, a town located in Kankakee, Illinois, nearby my district. In doing so, Governor Pritzker gave Gotion a lucrative taxpayer-subsidized package that would cost Illinoisans more than $500 million. In addition, Gotion is said to be, quote, reviewing and assessing, unquote, how it will use the green energy tax credits President Biden signed into law in 2022 to their benefit, also known as the IRA, which John and I voted against. In our extensive work on the Select Committee on China, we have uncovered disturbing ties between Gotion, the CCP, and forced labor, which raise serious concerns about our national and economic security. In a recent Foreign Agents Registration Act filing, Gotion claimed it was, quote, wholly owned and controlled by, unquote, its parent company, Gotion High Tech, which is based in China. According to their own bylaws, Gotion is required to, quote, to carry out party activities in accordance with the Constitution of the CCP, unquote. In June, our committee uncovered links to forced labor between Gotion and the CCP, including Gotion sources aluminum foil from a subsidy known as Xinjiang Nefarious, a CCP state-owned enterprise known for its prolific use of forced labor, including forced housing of Han men with Uyghur women and families. Gotion sources material from Xinjiang Join World, a company that participated in, quote, poverty alleviation through labor transfer, unquote. These programs are often a disguise for forced labor. A local CCP chapter even awarded Xinjiang Join World employee an award for implementing the CCP's ethnic policies. This activity is unacceptable and raises serious concerns about the intentions of Gotion here in the United States. We know that the CCP and President Xi have an agenda to challenge the United States' economic leadership and are determined to maintain their market-dominant position on critical mineral and battery supply chains. Further, the CCP has made it clear that it will utilize any means necessary to achieve those goals, particularly through state-owned and subsidized enterprises that engage in forced labor. While I believe it is important that we incentivize business growth, it is simply unacceptable that governors like J.B. Pritzker and Gretchen Whitmer have decided to leave taxpayers on the hook for billions in federal subsidies, funneling the companies beholden to malign actors like the CCP. Congress must do more to prevent this type of malign influence from infiltrating our country. As I mentioned, that's why I've joined Chairman Mollenauer in introducing H.R. 6175, the No Gotion Act, a bill that would prohibit companies affiliated with the CCP from receiving any green energy production tax credits through the IRA. As we look to the future, I remain committed to working with my colleagues on this committee and all of you to hold CCP and politicians like J.B. Pritzker, who are willing to throw taxpayers under the bus at the risk of harming our national security, accountable. We cannot allow the CCP to gain a foothold in our backyards at taxpayer expense. Thank you all for being here. I look forward to a fruitful discussion today.
Thank you, Darren LaHood. Now we'd like to just share a brief video right over here.
Over the past several months, the Select Committee on the Chinese Communist Party undertook a thorough investigation of the supply chains of two leading Chinese electric vehicle battery producers, Gotion High-Tech and Cattle. What we uncovered is deeply disturbing. Through a complex web of suppliers and corporate ties, Gotion and Cattle are deeply linked to the most troubling Chinese organizations involved in the enslavement of Uyghur Muslims in Xinjiang. Gotion and Cattle source products or services directly from companies involved in the Chinese Communist Party's ongoing genocide against the Uyghurs. For example, they both work with the Xinjiang Production and Construction Corps, or XPCC. XPCC is a Chinese Communist Party paramilitary organization that facilitates modern-day slavery in China. The XPCC provides forced laborers to nominally private Chinese companies, including, according to our investigation, alleged subsidiaries of CATL and Gotion. It is so bad, it is blacklisted by the United States government. According to experts, the CCP uses the XPCC to control, intimidate, disperse, and ultimately break down the Uyghur people until there is nothing left of their culture. But the troubling connections don't stop there. Gotion's supply chains are directly tied to a number of other CCP-owned bad actors that are forcing the Uyghur people into forced labor as we speak. We cannot allow these companies to continue to operate in our country, exposing American companies and consumers to their slave labor-tainted supply chains. That's why Chairman Mollenauer called on the Forced Labor Enforcement Task Force to immediately place Gotion and Cattle on the Uyghur Forced Labor Entity List, which would prohibit Americans from importing products and services from either company. America cannot be complicit in the Chinese Communist Party's ongoing genocide.
Well, we are very fortunate to have some wonderful panelists today, and I want to begin with our first panelist to make a opening statement, and then we may have some questions for him, but and he probably needs no introduction here, but Township Supervisor Jason Cruz. Jason is a resident here. He's played a significant role in this community, continues to do that. And we're really pleased to have you hosting us today, as well as you sharing your comments with us.
Thank you, Congressman. Appreciate it. We took office on in November's election. We had a recall election here in our township. The people spoke. It was an overwhelming turnout in an off-year election, and they replaced the board. I happened to become the supervisor, and we replaced all the trustees along with the office. And And when we took office, we weren't exactly sure what we would get into. It developed well for us in some areas. In some areas, is much more challenging. So, just a little background to that. We had to basically purge our IT department because we were held hostage by our IT department. We weren't able to access our books. We ended up going a different route with our IT, and we've now gained control of our books and our records in both the Treasury Department and the Clerk's Department. So there's been a challenging go through with that. It's taken us the last 8 months at this point in time. We had to change all of our phone systems along with the IT. We've been working with this entity to get them out of our basement at this point in time. Found out they were broadcasting internet. We were more interested in getting them out so they can continue to work and work in the community, but we have a fight there. So obviously, after taking office, I sat down with Representative Chuck Thelen of Gotion. We had a great candid conversation about things, talked about hunting, fishing, that sort of thing. And then the very next day, Gotion served us with a lawsuit. As the lawsuit progressed, the township board decided to bring on another attorney firm. We are now working with about 2, 3, 4 attorney firms. And the reason why we're doing that is to get a good idea of how to handle a court case like this. We're a small entity here and a township, and not a lot of us have been exposed to this big game before. And so luckily we have excellent counsel through all this, and they've helped us navigate our federal court case. At this time, where we stand in our federal court case is the judge issued a opinion on the case, and also put a temporary injunction on the township. Now, let me be very clear. The court case is a contractual dispute on our development agreement that was signed before we took office with the old board. Okay, it's a contractual dispute. So what we did is we came back to the judge and we asked her to reconsider her opinion and maybe reconsider the fact that she's throwing an injunction. We asked that also with clarification. So how it's played out is that's submitted to the judge, and the judge gives Gotion a few weeks to respond. That date is come and gone. It was July 14th. And we are now waiting to hear from the federal court exactly where we stand on that reconsideration. As far as the development goes with the court, that's just where we're at. Now, Gotion seems to think that they have a legitimate development agreement, and the board considers otherwise. We look at it, the fact that the development agreement was not executed appropriately by the old board, and therefore we are not bound to that development agreement. Okay, so what Gotion said is they said, well, hey, you cannot take these resolutions out of your through your processes and legislation that were put in by the development agreement. The board moved forward, removed some resolutions, and that's where the dispute came in. So that's where we're at this point.
Thank you very much. I just have a couple of quick questions.
Absolutely.
I know there have been some environmental concerns that have been raised. How are those concerns being addressed? And then also, what steps can be taken to ensure transparency in this process?
Great questions. So at this point in time, Eagle, Michigan, from what I understand, has never received any information from Gotion to continue their application process for permitting. Okay, so Eagle at this point in time, as well as I'm aware of, doesn't have anything. So that's how we're looking to see what Eagle does as far as how we're going to handle the environment. Now, on our end, we took back zoning control from the county so that we could have some oversight on what happens on this project. The whole project is located in Green Charter Township. And so we wanted to have our residents have a say. So that oversight can come in the form of a special use permit, which would happen on a large project like this. And then at that point in time, the residents of Green Charter Township can come for a public hearing. And then we document all their comments and their concerns. And then we'll go to a vote of our zoning committee, or commission rather. So there's a little bit of oversight. That's where we're set up. It's how we're set up to operate at this point in time. And that's where everything lies. So. Mm-hmm.
Thank you very
Thank
much. And we will now introduce Amanda. It's great to have you with us. Amanda is the founder of Concerned Citizens for Montana. And I know Darren LaHood, I don't know, Darren, would you say a few words? And then we'd love to hear from Amanda.
Well, we appreciate you giving a visa to Amanda, too, to be here today. Amanda is somebody that cares deeply about this issue in Kankakee County in Manteno, Illinois. And she has been, from the grassroots level, from the very beginning, very involved with this and doing everything she can with a team of people in her district. Her passion, her dedication and commitment to this issue is second to none. She's really kind of put her life on hold to be fully engaged on this. We're lucky to have her as an advocate. And so I'm really pleased and honored to have Amanda here today. Please welcome Amanda Piker.
Good morning, everyone and distinguished panel. My name is Amanda Piker, and I am a resident of Manteno, Illinois. I am also a founding board member of the Concerned Citizens of Manteno. On behalf of the Concerned Citizens, I thank you for the opportunity to participate in this roundtable discussion. Today, I will present to you a synopsis of how a handful of people in power, namely Illinois Governor J.B. Pritzker, Manteno Mayor Tim Nugent, and the Economic Alliance of Kankakee County worked behind the people's back to bring a toxic, dangerous lithium battery plant to Manteno. This company, called Gotion, also has known ties to the Chinese Communist Party and is a foreign adversary to not only the citizens of Manteno, but to our entire country. First, I would like to paint a picture of Manteno. Our total population is about 9,300. It's a small, quiet, tight-knit community built on the backs of generations of hardworking farmers and small business owners. Many residents and their fathers before them have lived in Manteno their entire lives. You can walk down Main Street or into the local diner, and people will greet you with a smile, call you by name, and ask how your family is doing. People move to Manteno to enjoy a quiet life. Most of us in the community started to hear chatter on social media around September 6th, 2023 regarding plans for a lithium battery plant in our town. Then just a day later on September 7th, it was confirmed Pritzker was coming to Manteno on the 8th to announce the opening of this plant. The majority of the citizens had only about 2 days to process what was happening in our community. We organized a small, peaceful protest for this announcement and immediately organized our opposition. The citizens began to ask many questions. First and foremost, we all wanted to know how this happened without anyone's knowledge. Our mayor, Tim Nugent, happens to be the president of the Economic Alliance of Kankakee County. This is a public-private entity of self-appointed business leaders in our county. Acting as president of the Economic Alliance, our mayor signed a non-disclosure agreement and was prohibited from disclosing details of the Gotion deal to the citizens. His inability to say the name of the company was verified through one of many FOIA requests. In August of 2023, prior to the Gotion announcement, our mayor, acting as president of the Economic Alliance, visited every taxing body in our county asking for the boards to approve a $2 million tax abatement for 30 years. He presented this deal as Project Unity, which is the title the state of Illinois gave the Gotion deal. Every taxing body in our county voted for the abatement without knowing the company name or its origins. In addition to $536 million in Illinois tax credits, Gotion was given a 30-year cap on its property at $2 million. Based on the inflated sale of the building, which was on the market for $58 million before the deal and sold to Gotion afterwards for $137 million. This cap is another tax gift. We are very concerned about the proximity of Gotion to our town. The plant is less than 1,200 feet from 14 residential homes that are located within a large subdivision, less than a half a mile from a school, another large subdivision, and daycares. Gotion's lawyers are inferring the plant is outside of our town limits. That is not true. This is in our town. As you can imagine, we are concerned for our safety, our children's safety, and our environment. For plant production, Gotion needed the land to be rezoned from light industrial to heavy industrial. This was done through an open public hearing in November in front of our planning commission. Hours of testimony and questions from the citizens were heard at this hearing with few comments of support. The Planning Commission voted unanimously to rezone the land to heavy industrial, even though Manteno Village ordinances prevent a heavy industrial plant from being located within the village. This zoning is in violation of our village ordinances. I would like to point out some facts we have found through research and FOIA requests sent to our local county and state government. Gotion is Chinese owned and committed to communist ideals according to their own articles of association. No long form from the Committee on Foreign Investment in the United States has ever been completed for strict review. This is despite a new rule added to the National Defense Authorization Act that prevents battery manufacturers like Gotion from making batteries in our country. Under J.B. Pritzker's administration, Gotion was given $125 million in incentive checks, which went directly to Gotion's president, along with an incentive package of $536 million from the state of Illinois. Gotion objected to the high percentage of taxes on that building going to our schools and requested a decrease in the percentage for the tax abatements. No environmental impact studies or health risk assessments have been performed. In 2019, debris from the adjacent rock quarry damaged the building that houses the Gotion plant, where volatile lithium batteries will be stored. The blast debris penetrated the roof, destroying the shelving below. The seismograph used to measure the strength of the quarry blast is located at the Superintendent of Public Works residence. Repeated complaints of strong blasting have been voiced by citizens of Manteno for years. We have reason to be very concerned about lithium batteries being next door to a quarry with such strong blasting. At least 231 acres of farmland have been purchased under LLCs for Gotion. The building for the proposed plant was also purchased under an LLC, as well as 3 homes in the neighborhood across the street. Each home is housing 7 to 9 migrant workers. The Army National Guard Readiness Center and Army Aviation Support Facility in Kankakee, Illinois, is among the largest projects undertaken by the Illinois National Guard. It is owned by the Department of Military Affairs and is located less than 20 miles south of Gotion's front door. It is home to 2 aviation battalions, a medevac unit, and 10 UH-60 Black Hawk helicopters. Recent job postings on Glassdoor.com advertise jobs starting at $20 per hour with a trip to China for training that begins on August 25th and will last for about 4 to 5 weeks. Kankakee Community College, our local community college, and our county received a workforce development grant to train the local workforce for this plant. During the Planning Commission meeting, we were told they had identified 4 classes that would prepare the local workforce for a job at Gotion. Why are they sending people to China for 4 to 5 weeks to train? There have been no signs of construction at the plant. Also, job descriptions state employees must be willing to relocate to Manteno and are required to live in Manteno. We were not told employees must live in Manteno at the Planning Commission meeting. We were told the employee pool would be within an hour radius. How very communist of Gotion to dictate where employees choose to live. I could go on and on giving reasons why we all should be concerned about Gotion being here in our country. The above are mere highlights. If it was not for our connection to our Michigan partners and the quick organization of the citizens of Manteno with Michigan's guidance, this Chinese-owned plant would have waltzed right into our small town, unchecked and aided by our own local government bodies. The concerned citizens of Manteno have filed a lawsuit against both Gotion and the village of Manteno, which has garnered nationwide support and attention. We hope our mission will help advance the No Gotion movement and further inform the Select Committee on the CCP. Key takeaways that I would like for you all to remember. The Economic Alliance is a group of non-elected business people who are responsible for bringing Gotion to the area. The mayor of Manteno then used his elected position to thrust this deal upon us. As an elected official, in our opinion, he violates his oath and fiduciary duty to his constituents. Finally, Gotion is hiding behind LLCs. We do not know exactly who is involved in the LLCs that have purchased land in our town, but we know that China is here. How can the citizens be sure that these people are vetted and we are safe? This may be happening in our small town, in your small town, but it's not a small issue. As your committee knows, this is a national issue. We are doing all we can as individual citizens. We pay attention to what happens in our community, but we were completely blindsided. We have raised thousands of dollars to fight the rezoning and nuisance in court. But the truth is, Gotion would not even be operating if it weren't for massive federal and state tax subsidies. We are essentially paying for something we don't want and we don't trust. I thank you for your time today, and I'm available for further questions. Thank you on behalf of concerned citizens.
Well, Amanda, thank you for that very passionate statement and for being here today. I just have maybe one or two questions here. Sure. In the Congress, in our oversight role, we've become aware of Chinese entities hiding behind LLCs that have bought farmland across the United States near strategic military locations. And in a bipartisan way, we've got probably a half dozen bills to fix this problem, and we're going to do that this year. You mentioned in your statement the issue with the Illinois National Guard being near there, with the Black Hawk helicopters being near there. When those issues have been raised to either Governor Pritzker's office or the mayor on national security concerns, have you gotten any response from them at all?
No, we do not. We do not ever get a response. We were told that I think the rule is 14 miles. I think there's something about a 14-mile radius, so this is a little outside of that.
And the issue of human rights that, you know, a lot of our Democrat colleagues like to talk about a lot, and support for human rights around the world. When you expose the, again, malign activities and the forced labor camps that the Uyghurs are involved with and the direct connection to Gotion, when that has been raised with either elected officials in Manteno or the state, have you gotten a response from them?
No, they ignore it.
Unfortunately, that's what I thought. Thank you, Amanda. We'll have further questions for you.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Amanda. Next, I'd like to introduce Emily Delabriere. Closer? She's co-founder of Horizon Advisory, a geopolitical consulting firm. Her work focuses on China's standardization ambitions, military-civil fusion strategy, and platform geopolitics, as well as their implications for global security and the economic order. Specifically, she has been analyzing China Standards 2035, which is a PRC state plan that builds on the Made in China 2025 initiative. Please begin your opening statement.
Thank you for having me, and thank you everyone for being here and for your attention to this critical issue. I'm going to take a step back and speak to the larger Chinese Communist Party system and strategy that's behind and is operationalizing the pain points that are being seen here and also across the country and really across the world right now. That system is best encapsulated in Chinese industrial policy. That industrial policy is defined by three primary features. The first is, of course, the objective. China's goal, the CCP's goal, is to lock in the dependence of the rest of the world, to make sure that we rely on China. Beijing then converts that dependence into market and strategic influence, leverage, and ultimately coercion. Second, in doing this, the CCP prioritizes vertical integration in strategic industries. This allows China first to very simply lock in dependence at the upstream of value chains. It then means that downstream Chinese companies can benefit from and secure access to Chinese supply chain control and therefore establish footholds internationally. Finally, the CCP operationalizes this approach with both non-market policies and with human rights abuses. Chinese industrial policy is funded by the CCP, and it's fueled by forced labor. This is deliberate. The tie between forced labor and human rights abuses in China and Chinese industrial policy is precisely how Beijing cements and spreads its genocide. It's also how China makes sure that the rest of the world can't do anything about it. If we depend on China's genocide, how are we supposed to fight it? All of this creates security, economic, and human rights risks. Those are acute right now. They're only going to grow in the future because China is prioritizing what it sees as future industries, what are going to undergird tomorrow's economy. Beijing does this because obviously those are growing markets, also because there aren't incumbents in them. China can set the playing field, can compete on its own, fighting against someone who's already a leader. Electric vehicles, batteries, and the inputs into them are a critical front in this Chinese priority and therefore in the risks it creates. I am preaching to the choir in Michigan, but Beijing prioritizes the electric vehicle industry and batteries because these are tomorrow's industry, they're security relevant, these are major growing markets, and they drive jobs and industrial capacity in much broader ecosystems just than their own. And the risk is this. The risk is that we depend on China for jobs and for products. And if that's the case, it means we can't guarantee our security without China. Companies' business models depend on China, and ultimately local economies do too. Beijing will use all of this for leverage. Beijing will also take away any of the benefits that come from this, whether that's a security relevant battery or a job here at China's convenience. And the whole thing, every benefit, every system that's built on this will depend on a system of forced labor in the PRC. To drill down on that point, there have been several examples mentioned of very specific acute ties to forced labor in China and Xinjiang specifically, and the electric vehicle industry. Those are all part of a much larger systemic reality. The Xinjiang Autonomous Region is the hub of China's genocide against the Uyghur minority. It's also a critical site of supply, processing, and production of materials necessary for battery production. Xinjiang has reserves of critical EV-relevant materials and minerals that include, to name just a few, lithium, graphite, cobalt, nickel, manganese, and electrolytic aluminum. Xinjiang is also home to the downstream processing built on top of those, including, for example, one of China's largest electrolytic nickel companies, production of graphite anodes, and the dominant hubs of primary aluminum production in China. All of this concentration in Xinjiang is a function of very deliberate government industrial policy. It's executed in a way that orients around building full value chains, largely in government-controlled industry parks. So over the past year, there's been the construction of a host of really major, for example, lithium processing hubs in China. Those are in parks that then bring in other companies in the lithium value chain, integrate them together, so one supplying another supplies another, and is doing all of this to make sure that they're meeting the specs and demands of China's major downstream battery and EV manufacturers. The goal is to make sure effectively that you cannot build an electric vehicle if you're not relying on products from Xinjiang. And this is spelled out in ambitions in local and national policies for the region. The whole process is operationalized, as you already saw in the video, by known bad actors, including the Xinjiang Production and Construction Corps, or XPCC, the paramilitary force that runs the show in Xinjiang and has been sanctioned by the Department of the Treasury as being the animating player in China's genocide of the Uyghur minority. There are known bad actors who are operating in this industry and are supplying companies internationally with goods made rife with indicators of forced labor. And this whole presence in Xinjiang is only growing, and it will only continue to grow because Chinese policy has said that Xinjiang is going to be a critical industry hub, a critical mineral hub, and a battery supply chain hub. And is doing this, all of this, in a process that, again, intertwines with the forced labor and genocide in the region as well, and I won't go into this, but as well as little to no environmental regulations. The playbook that China is using in this context is not new. And I think it's really important to look at historical precedent for it to see what we're in for. The CCP has executed the same approach in other fields and in other ones that are very relevant to today's. We can look at the solar energy industry, for example. That's another new energy industry and another one that Xinjiang dominates in. Beijing controls about 90% of the global solar energy value chain. That's absolute dominance. And the root of that value chain, polysilicon, Xinjiang is the dominant producer globally of that. About half of the world's polysilicon is made in Xinjiang. This is a process rife with forced labor. No other country can compete. The US used to be the hub of solar production globally. Since US factories, including ones that were invested in or bought by China, have shuttered. Now we're trying from well behind to catch up to the capacity that China decimated. We also have the opportunity in other future growing sectors not to put ourselves in the same position. But doing that is going to demand recognizing that you cannot do business with China. Thank you.
When you talk about the strategy they're using, you mentioned the solar, how vulnerable is the U.S. auto industry to these CCP goals of supply chain?
Incredibly vulnerable. And I think we don't realize yet how vulnerable we are because we haven't yet seen the OEMs in China decimate us because they're building on that supply chain. Basically, every critical mineral where this is possible that feeds into the battery supply chain, China dominates. And that includes critical minerals that aren't actually produced in China and are just processed there. So lithium, Australia is a major source. Cobalt, the DRC is. China has the supermajority of processing of those domestically. And then you go downstream from there. And China has deliberate industrial policies that support companies that have outsized global market share at key nodes of the electric vehicle supply chain. So they've given money to these companies to make sure that they've eaten their competition everywhere. And look at electrolytic aluminum, for example. You can't make the battery foil or the aluminum foil you need for batteries effectively without Chinese companies. And every one of these companies at every stage of the value chain is getting such huge subsidies that there's no alternative as long as China is in the market. And then you get to the actual OEMs. The major Chinese electric vehicle manufacturers, they have subsidies that go up to 50% of their revenue total. Good luck to any company competing with that, including because they're sourcing from companies that are underpricing because they have equivalent subsidies.
Along those lines, just to give us an idea of how they would, when they're down in the critical minerals and the supplies, the supply chain, when you think of during COVID, how they restricted exports, think of some of these critical, how has China responded when it was viewed in their national interest?
They cut off supply. And they see that as an absolute trump card for strategic or market effect. They say they do, and they have done it, and they will continue to do it in their interest and make sure that we don't have the inputs we need.
Emily, thank you for your testimony here today. I know you talked a lot about rare earth minerals and how China dominates the market. Percentage-wise, we on the committee have heard a lot about this, that China controls basically 95% of the world's rare earth minerals. Can you comment on that, and what is that accurate?
Yes, that's accurate. As early as the founding of the PRC, there were statements made by Chinese leaders that the Middle East might have oil, China has rare earths. It's been seen as a strategic trump card, and Beijing has only increased its control of rare earths beyond its natural endowment sense by taking advantage of and investing in other reserves internationally. But I do think it's critical. It's not just rare earths. Those baskets that are critical for a host of important industries that China has 95% control of. It's also the entire set of critical minerals, where China has a deliberate strategy to buy them up, to invest in the countries like the DRC that have reserves of them, and to make sure that its processing is absolutely dominant thanks to low environmental regulations, subsidies, and forced labor.
And then maybe my last question is, I think there's a bit of hypocrisy on behalf of our Democrat colleagues that love to talk about human rights, love to talk about slave labor around the world, love to talk about the theft of intellectual property and these problems, but it's right here in their backyard here. I mean, have you seen any response? They seem to be muted when it comes to any type of response on the allegations that are detailed and substantive of what's gone on with this company related to Xinjiang.
I think it's really easy to say that China is a threat and that there are human rights risks or even environmental risks from what China is doing. And I think there are very few people out there who actually want to deal with the costs of responding. It's easy in the short term to do business with China. No one wants to lose that.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next, we'd like to go to Brian Kavanaugh, is the Senior Vice President at American Global Strategies, LLC, an international strategic advisory firm. Mr. Kavanaugh focuses on critical infrastructure security and resilience, crisis management planning, continuity of operations, and disaster response and recovery operations. Extensive government background in working with Homeland Security and national security in the executive branch. So welcome, Mr. Kavanaugh.
Good morning, and I'd like to thank Chairman Molinar and Congressman LaHood for the opportunity to speak with each of you today about the multifaceted threats posed to the United States and its local communities. As mentioned, I'm Brian Kavanaugh, and I currently serve as the Senior Vice President at American Global Strategies, where I manage the Homeland Security, Supply Chain, and Crisis Management portfolio for the former National Security Advisor, Robert O'Brien. Prior to joining AGS, I spent 3 years on the National Security Council, serving as the Senior Director for Resilience and the Acting Homeland Security Advisor. However, today, we sit here, we're having a conversation in a very different context, different tone. We're navigating an increasingly complex global landscape, and it's essential to understand the diverse threats that we face, particularly those emanating from state actors like the Chinese Communist Party. These threats are not merely an abstract concern. They have tangible implications for national security, economic stability, and the well-being of our local communities. However, before I go any further, I'd just like to note that the Chinese people are the single greatest victim of the authoritarian Chinese Communist Party. They are subjected to surveillance state in a government that does not share common values with the free world. I cannot overstate the simple fact that the Chinese Communist Party represents an existential threat to the United States. The CCP is actively engaged in a conflict with our nation. Unfortunately, the tactics they use to wage this war are not readily apparent to us. They do not fit our understanding of what we perceive to be warfare. So what I'd like to do is I'd like to categorize the threats of the CCP a little more broadly. First, espionage and influence operations. The way the CCP understands state and local governments here in the United States, they view them as the soft underbelly of the United States. They believe that they can be exploited via economic and political ambition and used to surround Washington, D.C. and influence national policy. This is exactly what you're seeing happen in Illinois and what they're attempting to do here in Michigan. It's playing out across this country in a number of different markets. Also, in academic institutions and now even nonprofit organizations are being used to maintain access to United States innovation, technology, and even being used to influence divisive narratives across this country. I won't beat up too much on what Emily had already addressed with military-civil fusion, or what I call dual-use technologies, but I do want to foot stomp that the CCP prioritizes manufacturing of dual-use technologies. And what do we mean when we say that? We're talking about advanced semiconductors, digital displays, LiDAR that's used by autonomous vehicles. It's also being used by the military to, in high definition, map an area, drones, and even advanced batteries. All of these items have a practical use in both the civilian setting, but also the military setting. The CCP strategy is to undercut the civilian markets, overproduce, flood the market with products that are so cheap, so inexpensive that it kills off competition and eliminates access to these products unless you purchase from the CCP. That is what they perceive to be control. That is a tactic. That is not an economic game. That is warfare. I think one of the things I'll use as an example is drones. So I apologize. I see some of our great members of law enforcement in the room, so this is not directed at you, but I'm just stating a fact from another state in the country. 95% of the drones that law enforcement organizations in that state, 95% of them are DJI drones. DJI drones follow the exact model that I just mentioned, where they undercut the prices. We've seen this for now a decade, where they're selling drones cheaper than anyone else can do it. They're selling them at a loss, market loss for production. They're doing that to make sure there's no competition in the space. And as you're seeing in Ukraine, drones are now being used as the tip of the spear in warfare. A single drone that's less than a few $100s can be used to take out targeted 3 or 4 soldiers at one time. If we have to, everyone here has to buy their drones from the CCP, they can turn that on and off, and we don't have a scalable supply chain to meet demand domestically. This practice is being replicated, as I mentioned, in a number of other markets, such as digital displays and biotech. When we look at digital displays, I'm sure everyone probably is familiar with Samsung, LG, all have probably a TV or an appliance from them. 2 years ago, they represented 80% of the R&D investment in digital displays. Today, they represent less than 10%. China represents more than 80%. Cybersecurity. This is probably not a fun topic to talk about after last week's CrowdStrike issue. But I just want to note that in the CCP, they have a 2017 National Intelligence Law, which was really important to highlight. When you see in the documents that Gotion has to follow in their charter, they're part of the CCP. They're wholly owned by an entity in the CCP. The 2017 National Intelligence Law requires Chinese entities to conduct espionage, to conduct data collection, and then to lie about it and not acknowledge they're doing that. You look back at what was happening with TikTok and how the CEO would kind of give weird half answers in both directions. That TikTok CEO is trying to fit into that 2017 National Intelligence Law. They also have a 2019 cybersecurity regulation law, which is really interesting. Anyone who sells hardware or software into China must provide source code to the CCP. Make no mistake, that is going directly to the intelligence apparatus of the CCP and being used to collect information. There's only 2 countries in the world that have quantum computing capabilities that would enable AI to operate in a way that could be used for this level of data. It's the United States and China. The United States has laws in place to protect how we use that data. The Chinese have laws in place to ensure they exploit that data. It's a fundamental difference. Just a couple of examples. Cyber, the Volt Typhoon incident that I think everyone started hearing about last spring, which is still being unpacked and dealt with in the Indo-Pacific. It was exploiting Microsoft Windows across the Pacific in critical infrastructure and academic institutions. On March 18th of this year, National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan and the EPA administrator sent a letter to all 50 governors saying the threat to their water and wastewater treatment facilities is no longer a threat. They're actively being targeted and actively being exploited, and that governors need to do something about that. It's a little bit of a lack of leadership. Not only should you be making that letter, but you should be working hand in fist with those governors to ensure you're doing something to address that risk, not just dictating that there's a problem. Earlier this year, we saw testimony before the Select Committee in Washington, D.C., where you saw a noticeable shift. You go back to the FBI comments on China and cybersecurity back in 2017, 2019. They talked about the greatest transfer of human wealth in history, and that was the IP theft by China. What you're seeing now in January was a shift from all the heads of government agencies saying this is no longer an IP theft. What we're seeing here is a pre-positioning on critical infrastructure for the civilian population in a move that is wartime preparedness. They would like to be in those systems and have the ability to turn off or hold at bay critical infrastructure. The CrowdStrike example showed you how airlines, hospitals, and the financial institutions could be impacted by one defective code. Their aim is to be able to hold an entire country at its will through cyber means. Lawfare and economic warfare, we've heard a lot about that today, and that's exactly what we're dealing with here with Gotion. I feel for the township and the litigation you're entering, I personally have advised on a low Earth orbit satellite communications company. We call it has Goldilocks spectrum, which is a very special Ka band spectrum. When they sold these rights in the 1950s, no one knew what it was going to be worth and how it'd be used. The spectrum is owned by Liechtenstein. China put somebody on the ITU as the president or the secretary general of the International Telecommunications Union and began to try and relicense that spectrum to China. And when they couldn't do it through the ITU, companies formed in Germany and started opening 200 plus lawsuits per month against the company that owns this spectrum. The United States assesses that that spectrum has dual use application, both civilian communications, but it's also in a very unique space and range for certain military capabilities. Another thing we touch on and briefly is the land purchase. So what you're seeing across the country, and I can give you a couple examples. Texas, we had a retired PLA general, so a retired general from the People's Liberation Army of the CCP, acquired land in Texas, not too far from a U.S. Air Force base where we train fighter pilots in F-22s and F-35s, but it also had position along the southwest border. The go-in purchase agreement was, I'm going to open up a wind generation farm. Well, it's ironic when you're going to do that in Texas, there's plenty of locations where you have solid forecasts for wind to power these wind generators. The location that this general purchased, these acreage, have the lowest amount of wind in the entire state. So there's a lot of benefit for them to put up very tall, generating no value monetarily, windmills that have the ability to look into an Air Force base or capture military signals as they're communicating between the base and where the fighter pilots are training. And then I just briefly touch the border crisis and fentanyl epidemic are explicitly interwoven with the CCP. Right now, what you're seeing is the cartels using drones at a level and capability that we never would have expected. We were very upset by one balloon flying across the country a few years ago. The southwest border is experiencing over 1,000 drone incursions a month. These drones are developing a pattern of life on the CBP officers. They're being used to determine which route is best for human trafficking. And when they human traffic, how many officers do they pull from a different route to be able to move fentanyl? This is all part of a very technically advanced operation. Again, all aimed at eroding the United States from the inside out in a foot stomp. This is not economic competition. This is warfare. So as I mentioned at the top, this is an active conflict and one in which I think we've overlooked for far too long. I'd like to thank the chairman and his committee for bringing light to this, and I look forward to questions and this great conversation today.
Well, thank you so much for your testimony. And I want to just begin with something you started with, talking about the Chinese people being the greatest victim of this oppressive regime. And I think that's a really important point. one of the things I've noticed, and Gotion has certainly been guilty of this, is if you're critical of a project or you're against the Gotion project, they use the term, this is anti-Asian sentiment. And I think that is so deceptive and wrong. And, you know, my faith teaches me that every person is created in the image of God and deserves that respect regardless of their ethnicity. And so couldn't be further from the truth. But, you know, one of the things you mentioned is this oppression that goes on towards the Chinese people. We've seen what's happened in Hong Kong, people in prison now for expressing their political views, any political opposition. I wonder if you could comment further on this Chinese national intelligence law, because I think that has some startling implications for anyone. You know, when we had the TikTok CEO come before Congress and was questioned whether if he was asked for information or data on Americans, you know, he clearly said he would never provide that information. What would happen to a Chinese business leader or individual who refused to comply with the Chinese national intelligence law?
So I think there's a number of examples, and it's a great question, Chairman. There's a couple of examples where you've had prominent Chinese business leaders disappear, never to be seen or heard from again. You've also had some that lose all their wealth, return home to China, especially if they're outside of China, they'll be called back to China. They'll lose their wealth, they'll have an illness, they'll have some issue where they have to step down, and then they just slowly fade out of the light. I think there's a number of examples here, not just for businesses, but when they send college students to the United States, some of the students attending the colleges work for the state and are there to spy on the other college students and ensure that they're not speaking out against the CCP. They're see what classes they're in, developing them for intelligence, developing them for innovation, technology advances. But I think there's an example in New York where they put a CCP police station in, and they're controlling, it's basically, we call this transnational repression. And so that is something they're really good at. They're very effective. And when you come here, they don't have to target you directly. They can target your family. They can, I've worked with a number of colleagues who are working to get this type of information out at the state level. And the depths they're willing to go to target people who are speaking out, even if you're not a Chinese national, is impressive.
And this is maybe a more difficult question, but something I think a lot about is one of the strengths we have as a country is our freedoms. And when we have people from other cultures come here, experience those freedoms, it's very attractive to them, and many would want to stay. But at the same time, you have to balance this issue of if it is a foreign state actor, there are security concerns, espionage concerns. How do we balance that when it comes to student exchanges, these kinds of things, where as a country we want to be welcoming and show people the benefit of living in a free world, but at the same time you want to ensure our security and protection of IP and other things?
Well, I think the important thing to start with is all these examples where they use this xenophobia against Chinese people as their defense mechanism. That's gaslighting. To put it into like a modern terminology, it's nothing more than gaslighting. I think this hearing's done a great job of demonstrating on the surface what is actually happening and pulling the layers of the onion back. I am a firm believer, and our strength is from our uniqueness, diversity, and how we bring together cultures from around the world. And over time, that's what's made us different from every country in the world. At the same time, the Chinese Communist Party is by law identified and defined as a foreign adversary. So I think what we need to do is start treating them like a foreign adversary. They don't encourage or want Americans to go to China. They certainly don't want them in their academic institutions unless they believe they can flip them and turn them into an asset. To me, I'm caught as a national security expert as the quickest way I can solve this problem is to start treating the Chinese Communist Party like the adversary we've defined them in law to be.
Well, thank you for your testimony here today, and thanks for your prior service at the NSC, the National Security Council. I mentioned in my opening statement that in a recent Foreign Agents Registration Act filing that Gotion claimed it was wholly owned and controlled by the parent company, Gotion High Tech. And as part of those bylaws, Gotion is required to, quote, to carry out party activities in accordance with the Constitution of the CCP, unquote. Tell us what that means.
That is a not so subtle way to say that they have an expectation to deliver on the 2017 National Intelligence Law. Deliver on the National Intelligence Law, but also any of the other laws. And we just mentioned two today, the 2017 National Intelligence Law, 2019 Cybersecurity Law. Every year they meet, they refine these laws, they refine the directions of the party. We talked about the Made in China 2025, and now they have a 2035 plan. All of these plans are part of that requirement. They have to fulfill their requirements to the direction the party sets. And I'm sure you've heard this before. The CCP is very detail oriented. They're very organized. They have plans for everything. They have a 2050 plan. They have so all these things that they're being required to do in that FARA acknowledgement is to participate and assist the CCP in advancing those initiatives. You saw that in the Belt and Road before the Made in China 2025.
And then secondarily, I referenced the letter that we sent on June 5th asking the administration to put Gotion High Tech on the entity list. We are going to continue to push for that to happen through this administration. If we're successful, tell us what that means if we put them on the entity list.
Getting them on the entity list is a really important tool for bureaucrats. So I apologize to bore you with bureaucratic nonsense here. And that's not what you guys want to hear, but that's actually the levers of the government that are going to change how we behave with them. But by going on the entity list, you can change the paradigm, make them ineligible for DoD contracts. You can make them ineligible for federal funding. A lot of what you do, I mean, going back to the drones, 95% of the drones in this one particular state are DJI. If you can get entities like DJI, you can get entities like Gotion on the entity list, they're no longer eligible to spend federal grant dollars to buy and procure these items. Right now, that's the stick we have. And I think getting that on the entity list is critically important. And I'm embarrassed that DHS hasn't taken action on that.
Lastly, we've referenced this, but I think the more reminding of the public and our citizenry that we can tell them, the level of surveillance state that the Communist Chinese Party implements in China through their authoritarian coercion, I mean, it is like nothing else around the world. Can you just talk about that level of surveillance state and how literally they have every one of their citizens under their eye?
Absolutely, and I'll share a personal anecdote. So they rely on a social credit system to control the people in that country. So what does that mean? Well, I mean, to us, that seems a little foreign because how involved would it be to understand what everyone in the country is doing to be able to have a social credit system to control if you can leave your apartment, to control if you're allowed to leave your town to go visit somebody in another town? All that requires social credits in their system. A parliamentarian member, I was speaking at a conference in London last September, and a parliamentarian member came up to me and said, it was so impressive. I was in China. It was so impressive, Brian. I was like, well, explain to me what was so impressive. Well, I was in the cab, and I left my wallet in the cab on accident. And I went to the local police station, and I told him, hey, I was just in a cab 5 minutes ago. I think I left my wallet in the cab. He said, Brian, within a matter of moments, they were able to pull up on computers all the cabs. And they were looking in all the cabs, listening in all the cabs. And we found the cab I was in, found my wallet, and they instructed the driver to come back. And the driver came back and brought me my wallet. He goes, that's so impressive. And I was like, they were able to listen in to any cab. They had video into any cab. And you were able to watch the driver come back to the police station. Yeah, it was great. I was like, that's actually appalling. So that's not where anyone in America wants to be. We don't need Big Brother spying on us, and it's really unfortunate that that's the way the Chinese nationals live.
Thank you.
Much. Next, I'd like to welcome Joseph Sella, who served as the U.S. ambassador to Fiji from 2019 to 2021. He's the director of the Michigan China Economic and Security Review Group. In this role, he's expressed grave concerns about the aggressive efforts by certain leaders in Michigan to attract lithium-ion battery manufacturers from the People's Republic of China to this state. He believes that economic engagement with PRC-based companies can have perilous implications for both national and state security, and as these entities are closely tied to the CCP and its intelligence mechanism. Ambassador, you've had first-hand experience as an ambassador to a nation dealing with the People's Republic of China. Welcome, and we look forward to your comments.
Congressman LaHood. Good meeting you, Congressman LaHood, for the first time. Distinguished colleagues here with me, and friends and citizen activists present today. It's certainly a delight to be with you who have been in this fight for a long time, having the hardest of jobs. Before I begin remarks, I would just like to recognize two of my children who are with me today, 10-year-old Mariana and 13-year-old Rita Rose. We were about to head out the door yesterday, and they said they wanted to come along, so there's nothing like a daughter field trip. So, Congressman Molnar, thank you sincerely for your strong leadership, and you, Congressman LaHood, and for the honor to deliver these remarks at this important roundtable and discussing the deep ties that PRC-based Gotion has with the Chinese Communist Party and the threat that that presents to our national security and our economic security. The fight against Gotion and my work through the Michigan-China Economic Security Review Group would not have been possible without those who have had the hardest of jobs here. Everyday Americans and citizen activists who are on the front lines, and the indispensable counsel and work of my former ambassadorial colleague, Peter Hoekstra, who co-founded the group with me. And it is a blessing to work with all of you. The importance of the timing of this roundtable and the gravity of the matter at hand cannot be overstated. For all practical purposes, the United States of America and the rest of the free world are now in a Cold War, though now with the People's Republic of China and the Chinese Communist Party. What is now our fight will be the fight of my children and grandchildren and those of you here today deep into this century. As now retired Navy Admiral Mike Studeman, who, when serving as the commander of the Office of Naval Intelligence, stated in a February 2023 speech, "The China problem is more gigantic than understood or appreciated." This is crystal clear, and we are seeing it happen real time on the shores of our beautiful lower peninsula of Michigan, in this Gotion deal, the cattle deal, we can say too, and across the United States in other situations. 1 year prior to Admiral Studeman's speech in February 22, our national security and intelligence agencies convened a bipartisan group of state and local elected officials and business executives to warn them of the China problem, the China threat. Why? Because China is on the hunt through subnational incursions and influence operations to advance PRC and CCP geopolitical interests. This exploitation of our free and open polity in the United States often occurs through seemingly benign business deals, such as this Gotion deal, that can be located near military installations and become intertwined with academic institutions, state and local governments, and other institutions. At this meeting, our intelligence and national security representatives directed these officials and executives, when dealing with PRC-based and CCP-tied companies, to exercise diligence, conduct due diligence, and ensure transparency, integrity, ensuring that they're built into whatever may come of these engagements. This was memorialized in a memo that you can all find online in July of 22, after FBI Director Christopher Wray met his MI5 counterpart to talk principally about the China threat. It's all laid out in black letter for all to read. And it's a very and local officials should follow and abide by going forward. This did not happen with the Gotion deal, needless to say, led by Governor Whitmer, the MEDC, the right place, some in the Michigan legislature, and local officials. In fact, the exact opposite happened. Government and business elites moved fast. They moved secretly and were shrouded by binding and punitive 5 and 10-year non-disclosure agreements and certainly silly secret code. Define the directive of the national security intelligence agencies to perform that due diligence and strict scrutiny. The consent of the governed, was ruptured. Elected officials refused to provide information, even to their own fellow elected officials when asked, and unconscionably even to their constituents when they were pressed for answers about Gotion. They were not patient and prudent with this Gotion deal from the top down. Not take time to do a basic market analysis. They did not gauge the geopolitical terrain, nor did they risk analysis to ascertain that emanates from such deals. Fortunately, the beauty of our republic manifests by the governed holding their elected officials to account, recalling those elected officials entangled with this corrupted deal, and was certainly a pioneering moment in the United States. This has never happened before until now. And I can tell you, it's the first time that over their entanglement with a subnational incursion by a PRC-based and CCP-tied entity. I can tell you that it has caught the attention of official government agency beyond. So keep up the fight. I'll share a few points to further context of the threat from the PRC and this and that are involved with these incursions that provide to the United States. The 2015 PRC CCP National Security Law and the 2018 National Intelligence Law that Mr. Kavanaugh referenced earlier outline a whole of society responsibility for China's national security interest. These laws stipulate that citizens and private organizations must surveil, collect, and report, in other words, conduct espionage, as directed on behalf or voluntarily on behalf of the Ministry of State Security and other PRC, CCP, such as the United Front Work Group, as directed. Incidentally, Gotion does have the United Front program, their office in California. There is even a clause that the Chinese government will reimburse those in cooperation with financial funding. The mere fact that Chinese government could apply these Gotion employees presents a scenario in which Gotion and its employees could be compelled or influenced to conduct nefarious activities to the detriment of national security. Secretary Anthony Blinken recognized the peril of these deals with the PRC, saying in a CBS News interview last year, in China, there's really no distinction between private companies and the state. In January of this year, in a hearing in the Select Committee of the Chinese Communist Party, former Defense Secretary and respected elder statesman of the Democrat Party, Leon Panetta, when questioned by Congressman Molinar about the threat from the Gotion deal and others similar to it, Mr. Panetta responded, "I don't think there's any question they're going to take advantage of the situation. I think we're going to have to be very vigilant about what the hell is going on." In response to the same question, Secretary Pompeo stated, I think it is worse than the fact that they will engage in espionage. I think that is just the top of the list. They will use this in ways that will leverage Chinese advantage. These plants are deeply dangerous to our national security and ought not be built. All parties to the Gotion deal continue to recklessly defy these warnings to the peril of our national security. Roughly 70 miles from where we are sitting lies the secure military installation of Camp Grayling. It's the hub of the National All-Domain Warfighting Center. It is mission critical and trains our soldiers and those of our allies and partners, including Taiwan, in the domains of land, air, maritime, cyber, and space. To further illustrate the nature of the threat from China manifested in deals such as that with Gotion, 2 weeks ago, the Biden administration proposed a rule that added over 50 military installations across 30 states, including Camp Grayling. And this too can be found online. This is a map. The green shows a radius of 100 miles around these military installations, and the smaller green dots are the radius around other military installations. My question is to those here today, how much do you trust Gotion? Do you think that Gotion chose this location by accident? or did they do it as a deliberate attempt to sidestep CFIUS jurisdiction within the Department of Treasury? In my opinion, the message sent by this new rule makes me believe Gotion did choose this location because it fell outside the jurisdiction of CFIUS, as was the case with another PRC-based and CCP-tied company you may have heard of, known as Fufang, that had a proposed deal in North Dakota. Fortunately, it was killed by the Department of the Air Force after it was determined to be a grave national security threat, and it's 12 miles from Grand Forks Air Force Base that does a lot of very sensitive work, and increasingly so. So it's obvious this rule was driven by the Department of Defense and military department matters that cause others to include this of Camp Gray security. Further to the released this week by the U.S.-China Economic Security Review Commission reveals that General Secretary of the Chinese Communist Party, Xi Jinping, through various CCP apparati, are going more ambitious, brazen, complex, and frequent in their influence operations, targeting media, business, academic, and military, and political figures. It seems like every day or week you hear a new instance of PRC citizens conducting espionage over U.S. military installations. So it's all the more important to scale our posture to provide for our common defense. Congressman Molnar and Congressman LaHood, thank you for leading this forum. Such forums are critical to informing and educating our fellow citizens about the nature of the PRC and the CCP. This is particularly important as such encounters with the CCP, such as through Gotion, will continue to increase, and citizens will need the tools to counter these encounters on the state level. To win this second Cold War, it requires a whole of government and a whole of society engagement, and information and education provided in forums such as these is critical to this. It's a very complex time, and it's important that we are nimble, thoughtful, and decisive in our actions. Thank you for your time, and God bless.
Thank you, Ambassador. Appreciate your service to our country and then the work you've been doing to help us better understand these issues. Wanted to ask you to elaborate further on the implications of the new rule on the Committee on Foreign Investment in the U.S., CFIUS, and what are the implications for the Gotion project, and how do you see that unfolding?
The 30-day comment window is still open, so I think it's important. Citizens, I will be submitting a comment with Ambassador Hoekstra, and I encourage you all to do the same and comment away to give them your on-the-ground input as to what you think ought to happen and why this is a good thing.
How do people do that?
I will send a link, but this is through the Department of Treasury website. It's somewhat user-friendly, but you can find it. And it's you click a link on the website, and you look, I think, under CFIUS real estate jurisdiction. I think it was published, I want to say, on I think 18 days ago or 16 days ago, but it's a fairly user-friendly interface. So I think the implications are that, encouraging that Treasury has recognized this threat. I think your good work and the work of you all here has borne fruit, and that's why it's on the map. So I think that I appreciate your good words that you issued the other day after the rule was issued. Congressman Molnar will just kill the Gotion deal as a result of this on account of the threat. So it will really put the strict scrutiny to Gotion that they never really had to do. As we all know, they submitted a short form. Gotion applauded, saying, the decision by Treasury, they don't have jurisdiction. Well, they now have jurisdiction, and this will apply to Gotion. So, I'm cautiously optimistic, but we have to remain vigilant. 30 days, probably about 2 more weeks. Yes, sir.
Representative LaHood.
Well, thank you, Ambassador, for your service to our country. I'm curious, in your prior experience in service as ambassador, we've heard a lot about the CCP's Belt and Road Initiative and also their Digital Silk Road Initiative. To me, these are really just fronts for authoritarianism. And if you look at what Xi Jinping and the CCP have done on the Belt and Road. They really target a lot of second and third world countries around the globe. They go in and tell them democracy doesn't work anymore. You can't trust the United States. You need to move to our system of government, which is an authoritarian regime, surveillance state, but maybe a little bit more liberal on the economic side. And that's what they do through coercion. And then what they like to do is they like to sell their technology, Huawei, right, and other surveillance mechanisms to the authoritarian regimes. And then it has a double effect. It keeps the regime or dictator in power, but then it allows them to surveil their state and keep control like China does. Then, of course, China has a backdoor to all that technology, right? Because of that Huawei use or the use of Chinese technology, they have a backdoor to that. And so we've seen this play out all over. I'm just curious, your experience in the Indo-Pacific region, particularly Fiji, China has targeted a lot of those smaller countries there with this type of coercion.
An excellent question. So it was stunning warrior diplomacy to the aggressiveness, whether it's them to the Fiji Police Department, for instance, and others. I mean, the march has scaled since. Fortunately, we're aggressively countering those encounters, but here domestically, it is the same. It is elite capture. It is influence operations. Again, whether it's the tech that Mr. Kavanaugh and others here, or the manipulation of elected officials to get a toehold. I mean, it's checkbook diplomacy that China is waging internationally. Checkbook here to Michigan, and it's repulsive. And they are on Illinois taxpayer and the teat of Michigan taxpayers, and it is disgusting. And grateful for your continued engagement against.
I want to just mention Representative Joseph Fox has also joined us. If you'd just wave. Thanks for being with us. This concludes the formal portion of the program, unless there's anything any of the panelists want to add to the discussion. But again, I want to thank all of the panelists. Let's give them another round of applause. What I think we're going to do now is the panelists will stick around for a few minutes if people have individual questions. I know there's a number of media who would like to have a further discussion more in depth right now, and we'll have you come up here. But with that, Representative LaHood, again, Darren LaHood, let's give him a round of applause.
Well, thank you all. Real quick, I just want to highlight the fact, and it was mentioned earlier by Jason, that Gotion was invited to be here today. We have an empty seat for them right here, which I think is apparent with their name tag. We gave them every opportunity to be here today to present their case or to counteract what we just heard today. So I think that speaks volumes on that. And their silence and absence here today says an awful lot about their position. And lastly, I just want to read a couple quotes here that I think are important. This is a quote from Albert Einstein. "If I were to remain silent, I'd be guilty of complicity." Secondly, "If you are neutral in situations of injustice, you have chosen the side of the oppressor." From Desmond Tutu. And I just want to tell Jason and Amanda here, you are on the right side of justice and history, and we thank you.